doing it. Okay. And then I'm going to present my screen. I see from the people that are here that I'm just going to go quickly through these slides. I had anticipated a slightly different crowd, and I see a lot of math and science people here. So bear with me, and then we'll do some question and answer stuff at the end. A lot of people, when we start talking about data in the school context, they get kind of nervous about it. And they get nervous because it has a tendency to be misused. And so this first slide, I'm just going to talk a little bit about data. What is it? Data are a tool, right? Most data show how things are at a point in time. They show trends. They can be used evidence of change that has taken place. We use them to build models to predict outcomes. What data is not, though, and in my view of it, it's not meant to be used as a weapon. It's not something that we're taking and putting together to say, hey, you're doing a bad job or something like that. It's always meant to be something to show us where we are so that we can figure out what to do better to improve things in the future. It's not meant to be used for shaming anybody. It's also not going to tell you what to do. It only tells you what was. Okay, and we need to keep that in mind. And the bottom line in all of this is we need to talk about our data honestly. We need to take the blinders off and just really look at it for what it is. And then we need to respond to it appropriately. And what I hope to accomplish over the next few years is in our data culture is to bring about this mindset of continuous improvement. So if we look at our MAP scores and we're in the 45th percentile, well, there's obviously room for improvement. If we look at our MAP scores and we hit the 50th percentile, we're on average with the rest of the nation. Could we get better? Sure, there's room. If we look at our MAP scores in 10 years and we're at the 65th percentile, we could still get better. But if we always have that mindset of I want to improve the outcomes for my student, then we'll be doing something good. Recently, I went to a workshop with the All Learners Network. Of course, they're big into improving math education, but we were talking specifically about data and data use. And I shamelessly stole a number of their slides for my slideshow, just to add to this conversation a little bit. Ways data can help. We measure student progress, right? It's always used to answer the question of where are we at a point in time, and have the changes we've made improved anything? Some of the other reasons we collect data is because we have to, right? We have to report to the community how things are going. The state requires it. The federal government requires it. It's really there to help us guide our solutions and our outcomes. Some of the problems that we can have with data, excuse me for slipping there, is if the data that we have are not valid or reliable, sometimes we don't update our systems in time and we need to pull data and we just don't have what we need. Sometimes we look at data and we don't ask appropriate questions. Like I said before, there are people who use data as a weapon, and that really isn't an appropriate use of the data. We sometimes have a tendency to analyze data inappropriately, and then we come to conclusions that are invalid because we haven't asked the right questions. There are a lot of different types of data that we collect in the education world. Some of the first data that we collect on any student when they come in to register for kindergarten is this demographic data. And you guys can read these slides. But we collect a lot of information about students, and then we put it in our information system, and then a lot of times we just forget about it and we only report it to the federal government when we have to, and we never look again. This is a type of data, the perceptual data. I don't know how often we look, but I'm pretty sure it's not often enough. It's a qualitative type of data rather than quantitative. We'll talk about that in a minute. Some examples of it are how parents perceive our schools. What are our students' opinions of how the school operates, and do they feel safe there? How are other community members thinking about our school? How does the school board view the school? Some of you guys are, I see a lot of you from West Rutland are here. We talked about this the other day in the staff meeting. Zillow or the real estate companies put this state snapshot data up, and people buying homes in the area will look at that and see it, and they'll make judgments based on it, whether it's accurate or not. A lot of you probably have questions about performance data today, and we'll get to those, I hope, in a few minutes. Those are things like our MAP assessments, our grades, the SBAC assessment. Some things we collect, but we don't often think about, but we do report to the state, are things like graduation rates, mobility rates, students moving in or out of the district, suspensions, expulsions, college attendance, how many students are going into the job market, how many students are going to college, how many students are joining the military right after high school, those sorts of things. Are we actually preparing them for their future beyond high school? And then we have this program sort of data. Again, we collect this and send it to the state. I wonder how many of us actually take the time to look at it. But these are things like our teacher to student ratios, sports programs, AP classes offered, that sort of thing. This is one model of a way to get involved in data-informed conversations. And I think a lot of us with some data we're more or less at stage one, where we're still trying to figure out what questions we need to ask. The folks I was taking this conference from called it setting the stage. They broke it into 5 components: setting the stage, examining the data, understanding the findings, developing an action plan, monitoring progress, and measuring success. Most of you will recognize this as a PDSA cycle or some other mnemonic that people used to describe it. It's all the same thing. It's just that cycle of planning, doing something, checking the outcome of whatever your action plan was, and then reevaluating and doing it all again. I put this slide in here because this is just some ways that people have used data. Data can be used a couple of ways. One, to prove something. We might use data to show a gain or a loss in student learning. Very often, to do that, we're presenting to a school board or to some group who wants to see data. It's very quantitative. Numeric scores and rankings are used. And it's really more concerned with showing the effectiveness of whatever we're doing. The other side of it, which is where I think we really need to focus in school buildings, is on this idea of improving things, where we need to use data to get a better understanding of how students are working and how they're thinking. We want things that we would actually look at for that would be student work, observations in classrooms. It's more concerned with improvement and rethinking our practice, and then coming up with new questions and trying to answer them, than it is in just quantifying where we are now. This particular question I put in here, I like the answer to the side. When should we be collecting data? All the time. We should collect more data than we think we need, even if we just put it aside and let it sit there. I came from a place where data was everything. We collected all sorts of data on every little thing. We probably used maybe 3 or 4% of what we collected. I know you guys are sitting there thinking, oh, I don't have time for that. Well, we collect data all the time and we don't even know it. It's just, I put this slide in there maybe just for awareness and to raise some questions. Because I like the question. And from this conference, one of my biggest aha things was this idea of quantitative versus qualitative data, and how are we really using it. And I put the definitions in this slide just so that we could see them. Quantitative data expresses a quantity. It's a number. You can put it on a chart. It's the thing most people think of when they hear the word data, because it's the most out there all the time. We see it in the news, we see it in reports. Even when someone like Jay calls me in to talk to the staff meeting, what am I doing? I'm putting charts up there. I think quantitative data is great as a snapshot, and it brings up certain questions. Okay, well, why are we not doing well in 5th grade in reading? That quantitative data is never going to answer that question. So then we have to move over into the qualitative data side, and analyzing qualitative data takes a lot of time. It's descriptive. It comes from questionnaires, interviews, observations. You take a lot of notes, and then you sit down and you pour through it and you look for trends. But it does allow us to explore ideas and explain the quantitative results. And those are the kinds of things that we need to collect in order to actually improve practice. This is kind of redundant from the last slide. Quantitative data is anything with numbers, test scores, number of times somebody does something. Qualitative data, I just talked about again. I'll skip through this slide. This last slide that I have actually is a link. And I think in the meeting invitation, I gave you a link to this slideshow. What's buried in here, this is a summary from the state of Vermont. It's a multi-page PDF file. Let's see if I open that, will it actually? Yeah, no, that won't present to you guys. It has a table in it that lists all the different types of assessments that schools are using in the state of Vermont, what their purpose is, and the kind of data that you can get from it. So if you have time later, go into that document and look through it. And I will just, in case you're interested, throw the link into the chat. I found it to be a good document to keep around. Just, if I wanted to look at something in particular, I could go through the tables and find an assessment or something that would gather the type of data I was interested in finding. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I know I flew through that really fast and there was a lot in there, but I think most of you guys are here more to ask questions. So I'm going to open it up and let you guys start asking questions and see if I can answer them. I'm not going to promise that I can answer everything, but. I think I made a lot of you tune right out. That's fantastic.
Al, I keep going back to the purpose of data and the time that it takes to collect the data, analyze it, and do something with it, that cycle. How can we make the data that we analyze more purposeful or more compact? I mean, we have several different classes, several different groupings across the SU. Like, is there somebody who is prioritizing what we should be collecting versus, I mean, SBAC is important. Yes, it's very important for the overall yearly check-in, but that really is just one snapshot of one day or 2 days. So is there a way that set two-sided question, is there a way that we can make the real data, like what we're seeing in front of us, the growth and progress versus the proficiency, more public?
So that's one of the things that I am working on. It is not something that I've been able to accomplish yet because I'm new in the position. I've only had the summer to think about it. One of the things that we're hoping to accomplish with the EduClimber is to create some data dashboards that people actually have access to. So way back when we bought Alpine, this is kind of a long-winded answer to that question. Back when we bought Alpine, the intention was to make data available across the district to everybody. I think what we found with Alpine was that it wasn't as user-friendly as we were hoping for. A certain number of people got training and were able to use the system to great advantage, mostly interventionists. What I found, because I got into the game a little late, I went from being a tech integrationist to being a PBL coach to this data role. By the time I stepped into the data role, Alpine was already going away. And what I found was it was very difficult to use. And for me to teach myself how to use it was tough. But to get the training, I had to pay a lot of money, and the district didn't want to pay anymore. And training materials weren't available. So EduClimber is taking that place. They have better training materials. And I know a lot of people haven't got to see that yet, but we're still setting the system up and it's taking its time. I am also thinking my way through exactly what you asked, and that is, what data should we focus on? We've got all kinds of data all over the place, but what are we going to really look at metrics wise? What are those important metrics to track that show us the strengths and weaknesses of our program and how to improve that? So yes, somebody is working on it. No, we don't have an answer for you yet. That's the short answer to it. So, Jamie.
Hi.
Hi.
So I'm going to kind of piggyback off you, Amy. So when it comes to, say, an EST meeting where we have a student who is in question for their progress in class, most of the time an interventionist will have data and a classroom teacher would have data as well. And to open up, I'm just wondering how the best way to communicate both types of data with each other to make a more like bigger picture. I don't know if there's a good way to do that and how to present it and communicate both sides.
Presenting and communicating is always tough because it depends a lot on your audience, right?
Let's say it's like an initial meeting before a parent is involved.
Yeah, that. Hmm.
It's a tricky one. Sorry.
That is a tricky one. It's a tricky question. It's always easy if the parent kind of knows that the student needs help. Those conversations go really easy. If the parent is very resistant, it's a much harder conversation. And I am not really well versed in those kind of meetings, so I don't know that I have a good answer for you.
I think it's more so, sorry.
I always find that if you come armed with the data, it goes a lot easier if it's in a very clear and concise format. So a lot of this quantitative data is very easy to show, right? This is the testing we've done. You have this reading evaluation, whether it's F&P or the MAP scores or the SBAC scores or whatever it is you're doing to quantify it. You can show this child's performance is in this percentile range. It's hard to argue with that. The qualitative side of it, because it can be subjective, is a little harder. And that's where you have to be kind of gentle and delicate. And that's, again, you want to go in and set that stage where we have this data, we have this information. We're not here to shame you or tell you you're bad parents. We're here because we're concerned about your child's success in the future. And we're seeing these things, these trends, and we have these ideas to help your student.
See, for me, the parents, I would say it's easier for me to talk to them about what's going on, at least in intervention. I was more asking what like classroom teacher to interventionist to make the data more concise, with the conversation, just comparing apples to apples, like our data versus their data, how to like have a meaningful conversation around it. Do you plan ahead and see what, I think that was what you were going off of before, where setting the stage, who's collecting what.
Yeah, well, who's collecting what? What is the question? I mean, you got to start there, right? What is the question that we have? And then what data do we have to back up the idea that this is the question we want to ask? So you have a student who's suffering in reading. Okay, what are they missing? And what evidence do you have to support that? And if you can get your teacher to bring that to you, it shortens that meeting. If they come in and they say this student is having trouble reading, you're going to sit down and, okay, and you're going to have that conversation. What do you mean he's having trouble reading or she's having trouble reading? How do you know? Well, I just hear it. Okay, what data have you collected? If they know you're looking for data ahead of time and you set up that meeting and you tell them, listen, I need you to bring evidence to support your argument. And different schools are using different measures, right? Some schools use Fountas and Pinnell, other schools use other measurements for that. But whatever it is, if the interventionists in the school and the teachers in the school have agreed on it, if they can bring that to the meeting to back up their argument, it makes it that much easier to say, yes, this student needs intervention.
This isn't the last thing. I don't want to take up any more time. So say someone brought an F&P, right? Fontes Pinnell. Would it be appropriate to have them analyze that beforehand to kind of come up with, like, this is exactly what's going on? Like, say they have trouble with close syllable division, you know, is that's appropriate?
I would think so, yes.
Okay.
I
Because it's
would
hard
not
to
have
be
a
given.
problem.
Yeah, it's
I
hard
would
to be.
not have a problem asking for that.
Okay, because it's hard when you're given that and then having to analyze it yourself and then going over it and not knowing truly what the classroom teachers needs as a support. So with that, thank you so much. I'm gonna mute myself now.
Well, the only other comment I would make in regard to that, because one thing I am finding, sometimes teachers need help analyzing that data because maybe they don't have the practice or the understanding to be able to do that in an appropriate way for EST. Again, that comes down to PD and training. I have seen too many times, especially with the F&P, a lot of teachers give it and you get mixed results. And there's a lack of calibration even within a school building. And I'm talking about experience that I have had outside of our district, so I'm not pointing the fingers at any particular teachers here. But that was a difficult problem to solve. And it, not to take up too much time, but we came down to two ideas. One, to get more training for the teachers, or two, to create a testing group of trained educators who went to every school and tested students so that the test was delivered the same way every time and the data could be analyzed the same way by a specific group of people. I'm not arguing one way or another here. I'm just talking about solutions that I've seen people come up with in other places. But it is a problem, and it is a difficult problem. And the easiest way to deal with that is to get people more professional development or training so that we're all on the same page and we all have a baseline skill set.
Thank you for everyone's time.
The testing culture in a lot of our schools is really bad. So a lot of the data that's collected to decide we need consultants is collected from students giving minimal effort and or randomly guessing on things and doesn't actually reflect what they know and can do. So I guess, how is that accounted for when we're looking at data or when data goes to the state?
Right now, it hasn't been accounted for. The data we collect is what goes to the state. And the problem is that's always going to be the way it is because we only have the data that we have, right? The data analyst nightmare is exactly that. The data that I analyze is only as good as what's in the system. So if students are not trying, we're getting invalid data into the system, and then I'm analyzing invalid data. So if I'm going to show something to Lisa Madison or Chris Sell, I can only show them what I have. And if it doesn't look good and the state sees that, then they send help. And some of us are experiencing that right now. One of the things that I am hoping to do over the next couple of years, I've written up a 5-year plan and presented it, and I'm waiting to see whether I get approved on it. But it is to find a strategy to improve the testing culture in the district. Testing is not an evil thing, and we're not using the results to beat people up. But I need to be able to convince staff and students that we need the data to improve our system, not to hurt people. And guess what? We actually do care about the data. There's a lot that goes into that, and I won't take any more time right now unless somebody wants to. And I know Linda has a burning question. And you're muted.
Just a second. You're hitting exactly on what I believe, and I'm a big fan of yours, Al, and I love data. I love data because I can, in my mind, think things are going great, but unless I see it on paper, I need to prove it. So I do love the data. And you mentioned two things that I think are great for the district to follow up on. One is using our PLC times better to look at data. It's got to be a culture that we have to look at how kids are doing. And it doesn't have to be MAPS testing or SBAC testing. It could be they wrote something and you look at the scoring guide you used and you talk about how they did as a group and what needs to happen to improve them, or it could be map testing or SBAC testing. The other thing that you mentioned that I thought was really important was, and I should have written it down, but something you were talking about. Okay, the map testing and the SBAC testing culture. I really have to say the team I worked with last year did an amazing job. I was just on their coat strings or whatever you call it, but they really built up the testing day and made it like a really special day to show what you know, using the little videos that come with the growth mindset. And also each day that kids had a little tree. It might have been just a stick of gum with something special to help them with it, but just to make it important. So I think you might want to talk to those fourth grade teachers and what they did. I think it made a huge difference because the kids they were worried about it, and maybe some kids didn't care about it, but once teachers talked about it, they knew it was important, and I really believe they did the best they could. It just seemed it. And then I have the data to prove it. Like, oh yeah, that kid did what I expected, or, whatever.
Yeah. With these, I love everything you just said. With these standardized tests, I don't ever want teachers or students to fear them. I know we hate them in some ways, but we need to do them because we need the data to show whether our programs are effective or not. So yes, they're a pain in the neck. At the same time, I don't ever want students to be nervous about these things. I don't want them to feel like we're going to test them and they're going to be in trouble if they don't do well. But I don't want them to feel like they need to be stressed about taking these things either, because that's not the point. The point is just to find out what they know so that we can respond to it. It's not, I don't know how to shift this mindset, but there's kind of this mindset from students that I've heard that says, I don't care about this test because it doesn't go into my grades. And no, it's not going to go into your grades, so you don't need to be nervous about it, but it's important for us because we use it to decide how and what we're going to teach you. So it's really all about them helping us improve school. And
I wonder if there's a better way to communicate that to students, because I've tried saying things like that, but there's such a disconnect. I think it's just because of teenage brains being teenage brains. But they, no matter how much you beg them to do the best, because it's going to inform things that we have to do in class and district-wide decisions and all of that kind of stuff, it doesn't make a difference in how they view the test.
Yeah. Well, I remember being a teenager and I didn't understand why you had to fill the gas tank back up when you brought the car home, or that it wasn't okay to go to Montreal to buy a loaf of bread. Teenage brains. But yeah, you're right, Sarah. We do need to find a better way to communicate that. And that's something we need some brainstorming work on that. And Jenna, you have your hand raised.
I think that we could do a better job of modeling that as the adults in the building to students. I mean, it drives me crazy that in our building, we have overhead announcements going on during SBAC testing that are not for emergency purposes. My phone last year was ringing off the hook. I mean, there's just so many things that we could do a better job to model the importance to kids. I mean, this has always been something that I've brought up, is setting those norms during SBAC testing, and sticking with them on our part so the students see that.
Yeah. One just an idea that I have, I don't know. One thing that I loved, I think I was up in the Essex district when we were piloting SBAC. It was like the first year SBAC was offered. And we really kind of built this whole thing up with the kids. We allocated way too much time for each test. But one of the things we did, we spent hours after school with boxes that were going to each testing classroom. And into the boxes, we put snacks and we put books and we put puzzles and we put games, all sorts of things, so that when groups of students got done with the test, they had something to do that was during the test. If they needed a snack, they had it. We really built this thing up and tried to make the time less painful for them, I guess. But you're right. I mean, modeling is everything. And that's what teaching is all about, isn't it? It's modeling for our students. And yeah, we're conveying content knowledge as we do it, but we want to model everything. How do you spread that over the entire district and get all of our staff on board with that? I don't know the answer, because some people just don't see the value in some of these tests, especially the SBAC test. And yet the SBAC is the test that goes to the state, and that it's the result that they use for the state snapshot when it comes to academic performance. They don't care that we're also looking at MAP and growth and all of these other things. So yeah, the way we behave about them, the way we respond to that time, the way we build it up makes a huge difference for our students. Let's see, does anyone else have anything? Michaela, yes.
So we were talking about possibly like I feel like sharing the data with students would be a great idea. Has there ever been any opportunity where the data has been shared with students and what their response has been?
This is one of those hard things. Different people have different ideas about that. I personally would love to share the data with students just so they can see it. But again, this is where that question comes up of, are we shaming people? If the data doesn't look good, how are our students going to react to that? what kind of discussions might that bring up in a classroom once the data's there and they see it? The SBAC test itself, once the data is released, we do send individual scores. There's a report sheet that goes home to the family. Do they understand the report? I don't know. I think some do and some don't. Do they care? Does it go right in the trash bin? I don't know, right? I know some people care more than others. I know my niece has showed me her SBAC report. Why she's showing me, I don't know, but she was proud of it. I personally would love to be able to show students their data and talk about it. And especially with MAP, I do encourage, there's a whole goal setting worksheet. So you take their MAP scores and you take their strengths and weaknesses that are the MAP analysis tool itself tries to spit out what strengths and weaknesses students have after looking at the test result. And they give you a goal setting worksheet you can go through with each student, say, okay, here are your strengths. These are things you're good at. Here are things that we need to work on. What kind of a plan can we come up with to improve your understanding in this area?
Al, I know this is kind of, it's minimal, I guess, but I do show my students their MAP scores of the previous time. And I just call them over to my personal computer and I show them where they're at. And I just tell them that I want them to improve. And then a few days later, I bring them back over and I show it to them, how they did. And even if they got the same score or just a couple points higher, I congratulate them and, I tell them what a great job they did. And if a kid did the same or worse, sometimes I'll say like, oh, did you have a good morning that day? Do you think you were rushing? Blah, blah, blah. And like 9 times out of 10, kids will say, could I retake it? And I say, sure, I can carve out time for you to retake it, and they'll retake it and do much better. So I know we're not kind of diving into, real specifics on what they have done, but it does help kids kind of take ownership of it in a way.
Yeah. Well, and I think, and Jamie, I see your hand still raised and I'll get to you in a minute, but I do think that kids want overall to do well. I just think sometimes I have an unformed thought on that and it's escaping me, so I'll stop talking. But I think it's good to show those scores in as positive a way as you can. And I think what you're doing, Deanna, is great. And I wish that I'm hoping that over time I can get more teachers doing that sort of thing with their students. That goal setting, I think, is really important. Yes, Jamie.
I'm going to piggyback off Deanna, right? I think it was Deanna who said that. I've been trying to do that a little bit more with my intervention students, but I feel like, there is definitely a scaffolding you're going to have to do for certain age levels. I can be more real with, I would say, like 4th and 5th graders. And even my most reluctant students who are like rapid guessers and all that, I think that it's really helpful. I haven't had anyone say I want to take it again, but definitely really helpful for them to try their best next time. And I would love to see a culture devoted to that, with, like on their own accord, see the value. That'd be great. That's it.
Yeah. And that's one of the things I really want to work towards. Now that I'm in this position, I'm hoping to really push that idea. We'll see how successful we are. We're getting close to the end of time, of our time together, not the end of time overall. But does anybody have any final questions, thoughts, Do you guys feel like this was a productive time? I'm getting a couple of head nods, and yeah, okay. If you have any questions that come to mind later, send me a quick note. I'll do my best to answer them. Anytime you need anything from me, I'm willing to come in and talk to you, meet with you one-on-one. Even if I don't have answers or it's just a philosophical discussion, please, schedule some time with me. I'd be happy to chat and meet with you. Thanks for your time and attention here today, and thanks for the great questions and comments. I really appreciate it. And I hope you all have a good Friday and a long weekend.